My name's Jake, 35M, and until a few weeks ago, I thought I had the perfect life. My wife, Emily, 32F, and I have been married for 7 years. We have a nice house in the suburbs, 2 dogs, and what I thought was a rock-solid relationship. I'll admit, things hadn't been perfect lately. Life gets busy, you know? But I never thought I'll get to that. The first signs that something was wrong came about 6 months ago. Emily started staying late at work more often. She's a marketing exec, so I figured maybe she was swamped with projects. But then there were the little things, like how she started guarding her phone like it was a state secret. She used to leave it lying around, but now it was always in her hand or face down on the counter. I tried brushing it off, convincing myself I was just being paranoid. But deep down, something felt off. And as much as I wanted to trust her, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. That's when I started noticing the lies. They weren't big ones at first. Stuff like, oh, I grabbed drinks with Sarah after work, when I knew Sarah was out of town. Or, I didn't see your text, even though I'd watched her glance at her phone 10 minutes earlier. It wasn't enough to confront her over, but it planted a seed of doubt in my mind. I never imagined how far it would go, or what I'd end up doing because of it. I tried to ignore the doubts for a while, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. A couple of weeks ago, I finally decided I couldn't sit in the dark any longer. I wasn't proud of what I did next, but desperation makes you do crazy things. One night, Emily was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I'd leave it alone, but something in me snapped. I picked it up, and there it was, a text from Mark from work. Mark, can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? Winking face. My heart stopped. My mind raced, trying to come up with an innocent explanation, but deep down I knew. My hands were shaking as I scrolled up through the thread. They'd been texting for weeks. Flirty, suggestive messages that left no doubt in my mind. The worst part? There were photos. Not full-on explicit, but enough to make me want to throw up. I put the phone down right before Emily came out of the bathroom. She was humming to herself, wrapped in a towel, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire world had just imploded. I sat there in stunned silence as she got dressed and climbed into bed, acting like everything was fine. I didn't say anything that night. Couldn't. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this slide. The next morning, I decided I wasn't going to wait around for more lies. Emily was in the kitchen making coffee, looking like the picture-perfect wife. I walked in, sat down at the table, and stared at her. She must have sensed something was off because she glanced at me and raised an eyebrow. "What's with the look?" she asked, casually sipping her coffee. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. "Care to explain this?" I said, my voice deadly calm. Her face froze as she looked at the screen. I had taken screenshots of the texts with Mark and saved them to my phone. For a split second, her mask of confidence cracked. But then, to my shock, she started laughing. Not nervous laughter, mocking laughter. "Oh, Jake," she said, shaking her head. "Are you seriously snooping through my phone now? That's low, even for you." "For me," I snapped, standing up so fast my chair tipped over. "Are you seriously trying to spin this around on me? You've been sneaking around with some guy from work, and I'm the bad guy." She rolled her eyes and leaned against the counter, completely unbothered. "Mark and I are just friends. Those texts are harmless flirting. Everyone does it. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have to find entertainment elsewhere." That hit me like a slap to the face. "Harmless," I said, my voice rising. "Emily, you sent him photos. He told you he couldn't stop thinking about last night. What part of that is harmless?" She shrugged, looking bored now. "You're overreacting. Men like you always do." "Men like me?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So that's it? You're not even going to deny it?" "Deny what?" she said with a smirk. "That I've been getting what I need from someone who actually pays attention to me? Face it, Jake, you're a good provider, but that's all you are. Mark makes me feel alive." I stared at her, My hands clenched into fists at my sides. The audacity, the arrogance. It was like she didn't care at all about what she'd done to me. That's when I realized. She didn't. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't going to apologize. She thought she'd won. But she was wrong. So wrong. Okay, I said, my voice suddenly calm. You win. Her smug smile faltered. What? You're right, I said. Maybe I've been boring. Maybe I haven't paid enough attention to you. But you know what, Emily? I'm going to fix that. She narrowed her eyes, clearly suspicious. What do you mean? You'll see, I said, grabbing my keys. Enjoy your coffee. And with that, I walked out the door. She thought she was in control, but she had no idea I was about to turn her world upside down. I left the house with my mind racing. Emily thought she had me cornered. But if there's one thing about me, it's that I don't go down without a fight. I wasn't just going to let her waltz around with Mark while treating me like a fool. No, if she wanted to play games, she was about to see just how good I was at them. First, I needed to confirm everything I suspected. It wasn't enough to confront her with texts. I needed undeniable proof. I called my buddy Ryan, a tech-savvy guy who owed me a favor from way back. He's the type who could hack into NASA if he got bored enough. Hey man, I said as soon as he picked up. I need your help. What's up? Ryan asked, sounding curious. I gave him the quick version. Emily, the affair, and my need for evidence. He didn't even hesitate. Say no more. I'll set you up with something. That evening, Ryan came by with a small black box no bigger than a deck of cards. This is a GPS tracker, he explained. Stick it under her car. It'll send updates to your phone so you'll know exactly where she's going. I couldn't help but laugh. You've been waiting for an excuse to use this thing, haven't you? Absolutely, he said with a grin. Also, check this out. He handed me a tiny voice recorder. It's old school but effective. Hide it somewhere in the house. Someplace she won't think to look. I thanked him, and after he left, I got to work. While Emily was in the shower, I slipped outside and attached the GPS tracker under her car. Then I hid the voice recorder in the living room, tucked behind a bookshelf where she'd never spot it. The next few days were interesting, to say the least. The tracker showed her heading to the same location multiple nights after work, a small apartment on the other side of town. Meanwhile, the voice recorder picked up bits and pieces of her phone conversations. Most of it was mundane, but then there were snippets like this. Emily, don't worry about him. He's clueless. I'll tell him I'm working late again. Unidentified voice. When are you leaving him? Emily, soon. I just need to make sure I get the house. It was like a punch to the gut every time I listened. Not only was she cheating, but she was actively planning to screw me over. But instead of breaking me, it fueled me. I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to make sure she regretted every choice she'd made. The next step in my plan was putting on a show of my own. I started acting like nothing was wrong, playing the loving, doting husband she thought she had under her thumb. Little did she know I was just setting the stage for what came next. For the next week, I played the perfect husband. I cooked dinner, brought Emily flowers, and even suggested we go on a weekend getaway. The whole time, I could see the confusion flickering in her eyes. She must have thought I'd either forgiven her or that I genuinely bought into her lies. Either way, she didn't see what was coming. Meanwhile, the GPS tracker kept confirming her trips to Mark's apartment, and the voice recorder gave me more ammunition than I ever imagined. One night, I heard her on the phone with him, laughing about how easy I was to fool. Emily, he's such a puppy. I smile at him and he wags his tail. It's pathetic. I clenched my fists so hard I thought I might break something. But I forced myself to stay calm because the plan was finally taking shape. All I needed now was the right moment. A few days later, I told Emily I had a big work project and would be staying late at the office. She barely even looked up from her phone as she said, "Okay, have fun." Instead of heading to work, I parked my car down the street and waited. Sure enough, about an hour later, Emily left the house, dressed to the nines. I followed her at a safe distance, my heart pounding like a drum. She drove straight to Mark's apartment. Once she went inside, I called Ryan. "It's time," I said. Ryan was already waiting at a prearranged spot with a camera. He'd agreed to help me capture everything we needed to prove Emily's affair. A few minutes later, he texted me a photo of Emily and Mark through the apartment window, sitting way too close, laughing and eventually kissing. Bingo! But I wasn't done yet. I had one more ace up my sleeve, and it was time to play it. The next day, I casually told Emily I'd planned a surprise date night for us. "I want to make things special," I said, smiling like an idiot. She looked suspicious for a moment but eventually nodded. "Sure, that sounds nice." That evening, I took her to her favorite restaurant. I acted like the same clueless husband she'd been mocking, pouring her wine and complimenting her dress. She seemed to relax, even smiling as if she'd won. That's when I dropped the bomb. Halfway through dinner, I slid an envelope across the table. "What's this?" she asked, picking it up. "Open it," I said, leaning back in my chair. She pulled out the contents, printed screenshots of her texts with Mark, photos from the GPS tracker showing her car at his apartment, and the shot Ryan had taken of her and Mark kissing. Her face went pale as she flipped through them, her hands trembling. "Jake, she started, but I cut her off. "Save it," I said, my voice cold. "I know everything, Emily. The late nights, the lies, the phone calls. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to come up with an excuse, but for once, she was speechless. "You humiliated me," I continued, my voice rising. "You mocked me, lied to me, and made me feel like a fool. But guess what? The game's over, and I've already won." I stood up, dropped a few bills on the table to cover the check, and walked out, leaving her sitting there, stunned and speechless. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I stayed at a friend's place, someone who knew just enough about what was going on to give me a couch and a stiff drink. Meanwhile, Emily blew up my phone with calls and texts. "Emily, Jake, please let's talk about this. Emily, you're overreacting. It wasn't serious. Emily, I love you. Please don't throw this away over nothing." Over nothing. That phrase almost made me laugh. It wasn't just the betrayal that got to me. It was her complete lack of remorse, her inability to own up to what she'd done. But I wasn't about to let her dictate the narrative. Not anymore. The next morning I went to a lawyer. I'd already gathered every piece of evidence I needed. The texts, the photos, the voice recordings. My lawyer took one look at the stack of proof and said, "This is airtight. If she tries to fight this in court, she doesn't stand a chance." That same day, Emily got served with divorce papers. She showed up at my friend's house that evening, pounding on the door. When I opened it, she looked like a mess. Her makeup smeared, her hair a disaster. "Jake, please let me explain," she said, her voice cracking. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Explain what, Emily? That you've been screwing Mark behind my back for months? That you laughed at me with him? Or that you were planning to take the house and leave me high and dry?" Her eyes widened. "I never said that." I pulled out my phone and played the recording from the voice recorder. Her own voice filled the air. "I just need to make sure I get the house." She turned pale. That's not what I meant." "Save it," I said. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. Now, get off this porch before I call the cops." For a moment I thought she might fight back. But then she turned and walked away, muttering something under her breath. That wasn't the end of it, though. Emily tried to turn friends and family against me, spinning a sob story about how I was controlling and paranoid. Thankfully, the evidence I had spoke louder than her lies. I made sure our close friends knew the truth. The texts, the photos, everything. Mark, as it turns out, wasn't thrilled about being exposed either. A few days later, he texted me, calling me petty and vindictive. I couldn't help but laugh. He'd helped destroy my marriage, and I was the bad guy? But the best part? Emily and Mark didn't even last. By the time the divorce was finalized, I'd heard through the grapevine that he'd ghosted her. Apparently, cheating with someone's wife doesn't exactly build the foundation for a healthy relationship. Who knew? Emily's attempt to claw her way back into my life was as predictable as it was pathetic. About 2 weeks after the divorce papers were served, she showed up at my office unannounced. I work in a small company where everyone knows everyone, so you can imagine how awkward it was when my receptionist buzzed me and said, there's a woman here to see you. She's crying a lot." I sighed and told her to send Emily in. When she walked into my office, she looked like she'd been through hell. Dark circles under her eyes, her hair a mess. But instead of feeling sorry for her, I felt nothing. "Jake, please," she started, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake. I know that now, but we can fix this." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "What exactly do you want me to say, Emily? That everything's magically forgiven? That I'm just going to forget what you did?" Her tears came on cue. I was lost. I didn't know how to handle the distance between us. Mark meant nothing to me. It was just a stupid distraction. "I love you, Jake. I've always loved you."
I stirrte her, unblinking.
"Do you even hear yourself? You love me, but you mocked me behind my back. You love me, but you went to Mark for attention instead of talking to me. You love me, but you were ready to take everything I worked for and leave me with nothing. That's not love, Emily. That's selfishness." She sank into the chair across from me, sobbing now. "I'll do anything to make it right," she whispered. "Please, just give me one more chance." I wanted to laugh. "You had your chances, Emily. You burned through every single one of them. And you know what? I'm better off without you." She didn't take that well. Her sobs turned into anger, and she launched into a tirade about how I was being unforgiving and cold-hearted. She accused me of giving up on us, as if the blame for her affair somehow fell on me. "I think we're done here," I said, standing and opening the office door. "Don't come here again. If you need to contact me, do it through my lawyer." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the whole office heard it. One of my co-workers poked his head in a few minutes later, looking amused. "Ex-wife?" he asked. "Soon to be?" I replied, shaking my head. "And not soon enough." But Emily wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, she escalated her antics. She showed up at my gym, accidentally bumped into me at the grocery store, and even tried to get my mom to talk me into reconciling. That was a laugh. My mom had seen the evidence and was firmly in my corner. The final straw came when she showed up drunk at my apartment one night, pounding on the door and screaming my name. My neighbors called the cops before I even had a chance to. She was escorted away in handcuffs, shouting about how I was ruining her life. After the drunk meltdown at my apartment, Emily's reputation started to spiral, and honestly, I didn't have to lift a finger. Karma did all the heavy lifting for me. Word about her behavior spread quickly. Between her outburst at my office and her drunken scene at my place, people began to see her true colors. Friends who had initially bought into her sob story started distancing themselves. Even her family, who'd always been supportive of her, began calling me to apologize for her actions. It was surreal, but the real fireworks started at her job. Apparently, her affair with Mark wasn't as low-key as she thought. Someone, maybe one of her coworkers, maybe Mark himself, leaked the details to HR. Turns out, Emily and Mark had been using company time and resources for their little trysts. Emails, calendar invites, even expense reports. It all came to light in a glorious, scandalous mess. Emily was called into a meeting with HR, where she was given 2 options: resign quietly or face termination. She chose the former, but the damage was done. Her glowing career as a marketing exec was in shambles. And as for Mark, he got fired outright. I guess loyalty only goes so far when your affair partner costs you your job. Not long after that, I heard from mutual friends that Emily was struggling to find work. Her once impeccable resume now had a glaring hole where her last position used to be. And in our industry, word travels fast. Nobody wanted to hire someone with that kind of baggage. It didn't stop there, though. One night, I got a call from an old high school friend, Lauren, who worked at a small PR firm. "You're not going to believe this," she said, laughing. "Emily applied for a job here. She didn't recognize my name on the interview schedule. Seriously, I said, half amused, half annoyed. She didn't even make it through the first round, Lauren continued. When I saw her name, I flagged her immediately. I didn't tell the team why, but let's just say her reputation preceded her. It was petty, sure, but I wasn't going to lose sleep over it. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I finalized the divorce without any major battles. Emily knew she didn't stand a chance in court with all the evidence I had. I kept the house, my savings, and, most importantly, my dignity. But what really put the cherry on top of this whole ordeal was Mark. Remember him? The guy who thought he'd won when he stole Emily from me? Well, not only did he lose his job, but he also lost whatever fleeting relationship he had with Emily. Apparently, he ghosted her after the HR fallout, leaving her to deal with the mess alone. The last I heard, Emily had moved back in with her parents and was working part-time at some small retail store. It was a far cry from the life she once bragged about. With Emily out of my life, I felt like a weight had been lifted. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I spent the next few months focusing on myself. Hitting the gym, reconnecting with friends, and rediscovering hobbies I'd neglected during my marriage. It was strange but refreshing to be on my own. One unexpected bright spot came when Lauren, the friend who flagged Emily's application at her PR firm, invited me out for drinks. "You deserve to celebrate," she said, grinning as she handed me a whiskey. We ended up talking for hours about old times, about the disaster that was my marriage, and about the random quirks of life. She'd always been a good friend, but that night, something shifted. It wasn't like we planned it, but over the next few weeks, our casual hangouts turned into something more. Lauren was everything Emily wasn't. Genuine, supportive, and, most importantly, honest. She knew my baggage, and instead of running from it, she helped me unpack it. Being with her felt effortless, like I didn't have to put on a show or constantly look over my shoulder. Meanwhile, Emily was still spiraling. I hadn't heard from her directly since the drunk meltdown at my apartment, but word got around. She tried reaching out to some of our old mutual friends, only to be met with cold shoulders. One of them even told me she'd asked if I was seeing anyone. "She seemed weirdly interested in your love life," they said, like she was fishing for something. It didn't take long for Emily to get her answer. Lauren and I didn't exactly keep things secret, and eventually, photos of us started popping up on social media. At a concert, hiking, grabbing brunch. I wasn't trying to rub it in, but if Emily happened to see them, well, let's just call it a happy accident. Then one day, Emily made her move. She sent me an email. Long, rambling, and filled with everything from apologies to veiled insults. She claimed she'd changed and realized how much she'd hurt me. But the kicker? She said she wanted to rebuild our friendship. I didn't even dignify it with a response. Instead, I forwarded it to Lauren, who laughed so hard she nearly choked on her coffee. "Friendship? After everything she did? That's rich." "Yeah," I said, deleting the email. "I'm not falling for it." As for Mark, I heard through the grapevine that he'd been fired from 2 more jobs since the HR scandal. Turns out, once a snake, always a snake. The last I heard, he was working as a rideshare driver and still blaming everyone else for his problems. Poetic justice, if you ask me. Now that the dust has settled, I've had time to reflect on everything. If you'd asked me a year ago if I'd be happier without Emily, I probably would have said no. Back then, I couldn't imagine my life without her. She was my wife, my partner, the person I thought I'd grow old with. But the truth is, sometimes losing someone is the best thing that can happen to you. Emily's betrayal broke me in ways I didn't think I could recover from. The lies, the manipulation, the sheer audacity. It all made me question everything about myself. Was I not enough? Did I miss the signs? Was this my fault? But the more I dug into those questions, the more I realized the problem wasn't me. It was her. Cheating isn't just a mistake. It's a choice. A series of selfish decisions that prioritizes short-term gratification over everything else. And Emily? She made her choices. She chose Mark. She chose deceit. And when it all fell apart, she tried to crawl back. Not because she loved me, but because she realized I was the best thing she'd ever had. As for me, I've come out of this stronger. I've learned the importance of trusting my gut, of setting boundaries, and of valuing myself enough to walk away from someone who doesn't. I've also learned that revenge, while satisfying, isn't the ultimate goal. The best revenge is moving on and building a life that makes you genuinely happy. Lauren has been a huge part of that happiness. She saw me at my lowest and didn't run. She's kind, funny, and honest. Everything I didn't know I needed. We're taking things slow, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm with someone who truly has my back. As for Emily, I've stopped keeping tabs on her. I don't need to. Whatever happens to her now isn't my concern. I hope she figures out her life, but it's no longer my responsibility. And Mark? Well, let's just say karma handled him nicely. Advice for others. If you're in a situation like mine, here's what I'll tell you. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Your gut is often smarter than your heart. Gather evidence. If you suspect infidelity, protect yourself. Document everything so you're not left vulnerable. Don't settle for less. You deserve honesty, respect, and loyalty. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Rebuild for yourself. Moving on isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your peace and happiness. To anyone reading this who's going through something similar, it gets better. The pain doesn't last forever. And one day you'll look back and realize you're stronger than you ever thought you could be. Thank you for staying with me. This crazy journey is finally over and I'm ready for what's next. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more interesting stories. And leave a comment with what you would do in this situation. See you in the next videos.